Hi, loves. Welcome back to Designed for More. I'm really glad you're here and I'm excited about today's topic because I've really been feeling called into talking about capacity, about becoming the version of you who can actually hold the life you want. Because stepping into more isn't about chasing more, it's about widening into it. There's a version of you that can hold what you desire. And I said hold, not grip or brace or perform for it, but receive it because you can hold it. And you don't become her by pushing harder. You become her by widening slowly. We talk so often about calling in more visibility, more love, more impact, more clarity, more money, more freedom. But what we rarely talk about is that more is not an achievement. More is a capacity issue. And sometimes what feels like delay is actually preparation. Sometimes what feels like stagnation is stabilization. And sometimes what feels like, but why isn't it here yet, is life widening you first. Not to test you, not to punish you, but to make sure that you don't collapse inside the very thing that you've been asking for. And that distinction changes everything. So let's slow this down and make this practical. Let me ask you, if the thing you want arrived tomorrow, fully formed, would you be able to hold it calmly? If your visibility doubled overnight, would your body soften into it or would you tense? Would you start scanning for criticism? Would you over-explain, over-deliver, overwork? If money increased, and I mean truly increased, would you feel steady? Or would you suddenly feel a pressure to justify it, pressure to prove you deserve it, pressure to maintain it or secure it? If your relationship deepened, if intimacy truly expanded, would you stay open? Or would you subtly create conflict to reduce the intensity? And please notice something as you sit with these questions. None of this is about worth. It's about stability. Because expansion does not test your desire. Expansion tests your nervous system, and that's a very different conversation. When I say nervous system, I'm not just talking about anxiety or stress in an obvious way. I'm talking about the deeper question your body is always asking. Is this safe to receive? Is this safe to hold? Is this safe to be seen inside? Is it safe to keep? Because your heart can want something intensely, and your body can still brace against it. Not because your body is trying to sabotage you, but because your body is trying to protect you. And that protection isn't a failing, it's intelligence. Most people don't collapse because they don't want more. They collapse because they cannot yet hold more. And when we can't hold more, we unconsciously reduce the intensity back to what feels familiar. We overcommit and burn out. We sabotage and create problems. We spiral into doubt. We suddenly question our alignment. We say things like, I don't know, maybe this isn't actually what I want. Not because we were wrong, but because something exceeded our current capacity. And that level of intensity, attention, responsibility, love, money, expectation, felt unsafe. So the system contracted. And again, not because it failed, but because it was trying to protect. Your nervous system will always choose familiar over expanded until familiar becomes expanded. And that happens slowly. And here's one of the most important parts I find of this process. A lot of people assume that if they truly wanted something, they would only feel excitement about it. But that's not how the human system works. When something is genuinely bigger, genuinely new, It often carries a mixed signal. It's excitement and activation, desire and bracing, expansion and a bit of fear. And if you're someone who tends to interpret activation as a sign that you're not ready, then you might stop there. You might decide that it's not meant for you. But what if the activation is simply showing you the edge of your current capacity? What if that edge is not a stop sign, but a widening point? Because there's a difference between a nervous system no and a nervous system not yet. There's a difference between something being misaligned and something being aligned, but bigger than your current stabilization that you have available. And a lot of us were never taught how to tell the difference. No, we were taught to force, we were taught to avoid, but we were not taught how to widen, how to expand this internal container slowly enough that more can arrive without collapsing us. And maybe you've seen this in small moments in your own life. Maybe there was a time when being seen felt activating, when someone praising you felt uncomfortable, or when receiving money without overworking felt edgy, when resting without guilt felt impossible. And then gradually something shifted. What once felt activating now feels neutral. And that neutrality isn't stagnation, it's capacity widening. And the quiet nature of that widening process is why we often miss it or undervalue it, because it doesn't look or feel dramatic. It looks and feels steady. In fact, some of the most powerful growth you will ever experience may feel quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because your system is integrating, because your identity is catching up, because your nervous system is learning a new normal. And it's hard to prove quiet growth. It doesn't give your mind much to hold on to. There's no obvious milestone, no external validation, no big moment where you can point and say, see, I'm progressing. It just feels like becoming. And that is the work. We often think the gap between where we are and what we want is about effort. If I just tried harder, if I was more consistent, if I was more disciplined, if I showed up more, if I pushed through the resistance. But effort increases output, not necessarily capacity. And output without capacity will just create collapse. There is a big difference between escalation and widening. Escalation is doing more. Widening is stabilizing at the level you're already at. Escalation feels urgent. Widening feels grounded. Escalation burns hot, but widening builds roots. Part of this widening is also about widening your identity. And I find that we don't talk about this enough. Identity has ceilings. We build ceilings around how visible we're allowed to be, how wealthy we're allowed to be, how loved we're allowed to be, how powerful we're allowed to be, how responsible we're allowed to be without resentment. And these ceilings are most often somatic. They live in the body. So maybe you think you want more visibility, and you might, but your system might have a ceiling around what it associates visibility with. You might think you want more love, and you might. But your system might have a ceiling around how safe closeness feels. Maybe you think you want more money, and you probably do. But your system might have a ceiling around what money has meant historically. Pressure, instability, expectation, responsibility. And so you don't reject your desire, you unconsciously limit the increase until your body feels safe inside of it. Your system widens at the pace that it can integrate. For example, if you grew up equating attention with danger, more visibility will activate contraction. If you grew up equating love with instability, then more intimacy will activate protection. If you equated money with pressure, then more income will activate bracing. If you equated responsibility with self-sacrifice, then more impact will activate martyr energy. And these aren't mindset blocks. We can't simply think our way through them. They're embodied memories that become nervous system patterns. They're protective strategies, and they don't dissolve through force. They dissolve through safety, through repetition, through gradual widening. And that's why capacity grows quietly, not through intensity, but through staying with slightly more attention without shrinking, staying with slightly more money without gripping, staying with slightly more love without deflecting, or staying with slightly more responsibility without over-identifying. Capacity grows when you remain present with slightly more than yesterday without collapsing. And that edge, that subtle stretch, that's where widening happens sustainably. And if you're someone who loves a big leap, if your mind is like, let's just jump to the next level, I get it. But nervous systems don't leap. They acclimate, they recalibrate, they learn through lived experience. And that's why the stay, the subtlety, the micro moments matter. Because in them, your body learns this is safe, this is survivable, this is workable, this is mine. Not because you convinced yourself, but because you lived it. And in that living, it begins to feel safe. And in that safety, it can be sustainable. More success will require more capacity. More love requires more capacity. More leadership, more visibility. It all requires more capacity for our nervous system, for our emotional range, for our identity to widen into it so that it can hold it. If you can only tolerate being steady, then any intensity will destabilize you. If your body can only tolerate being liked, then criticism will collapse you. If you can only tolerate certainty, then ambiguity will feel like failure. And building capacity, widening your capacity, your emotional range, your identity, is the ability to feel more without reacting more. And that takes practice in the micro moments of everyday life, just a little more over time. And the nervous system strengthens, and we learn that intensity does not equal danger. And this is where it becomes less about how do I get what I want? Here's 10, tips to manifestation. Because the path is not a straight line toward desire. The path is the widening that happens on the way. And that widening is the becoming. And actually, let's pause here to feel into this, into our bodies. I invite you to close your eyes if you can, but if you're walking or driving, please be safe and just keep your eyes wide open. But in either case, you can take a breath with me here. Breathing life force energy in through the nose. Filling up, and releasing gently through the mouth. And notice, where do you feel stretched right now? Not where you feel behind, but where you feel stretched. That's usually the place that capacity is being built. It's not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're widening. And I invite you to feel into where that space is widening for you. Okay, let's keep going. Sometimes we can misinterpret steadiness as boredom, right? Sometimes we misinterpret neutrality as a lack of momentum, but that steadiness is often integration. It's the moment where your system is learning to hold more without reacting. So the more stable you become, the less dramatic expansion actually needs to be. You don't need fireworks. You need range. You need the ability to sit calmly inside what was once something that would overwhelm you. And that is the ultimate sustainable becoming. There are versions of more that are loud. They arrive like a wave, like a sudden opportunity or a sudden expansion, a sudden increase. And there are versions of more that are quiet. They arrive like a new normal, a steady increase in resilience, a steadier relationship with being seen, with receiving, with your own desire. And the quiet more is often the one that lasts because it's the one that your nervous system can actually hold. The more you chase the next level, the more your system contracts. Because chasing often carries urgency or pressure. It often carries the belief that this moment, right here and now, is not enough. And your nervous system hears that and feels that. It hears not safe, not stable, must hurry. And when the system is in must hurry, then it can't soften. It can't receive. It can't widen. It can only push. And pushing can create output. Yeah, it sure can. But pushing rarely creates sustainable expansion. I'm getting emotional here because isn't it true that we often share the medicine we most need to hear? The more you stabilize at your current edge, the more naturally the next level arrives. Because life doesn't respond to force, it responds to coherence. It responds to safety. It responds to the version of you who can hold what you are asking for without collapsing inside of it. And when that stability is present, then expansion doesn't feel explosive. It feels obvious. It feels natural. It feels like, yeah, of course. And let me be clear that coherence doesn't mean that you never feel fear. It doesn't mean that you're never going to be activated or that you're never going to feel intensity. But it means that you'll feel those things without making it mean that you're unsafe. You'll feel the stretch without making it mean that you're failing. You can feel uncertainty without making it mean that you're off track. It means the system has enough range to stay present. And staying present is what builds capacity. And building capacity is what allows us to not only receive, but hold our more. And this is where I see so many people confuse clarity with safety. They think that if they can just be certain, they'll relax. If they can just know the outcome, they'll soften. But safety doesn't come from knowing. It comes from capacity. Or I should say, not true safety, not unconditional safety, which comes from the ability to be with what is here now, to be able to stay with uncertainty, without spiraling, from the ability to hold intensity without gripping. That's why this conversation is so much bigger than goals. It's about the kind of woman or man that you're becoming. And there's another important layer here if we're talking about capacity. Because sometimes the reason that you can't hold the more that you're calling in is because you're already holding too much that isn't actually yours. Old obligations, old roles, old expectations or identities, and your system can't widen if it's already over full. So capacity work isn't only holding more, it's also about clearing what you never needed to hold in the first place. Because you've been strong for a long time, because you've carried a lot, because you're so capable. But sometimes the growth edge is learning to release without fear. The nervous system can often associate letting go with danger, especially if you have an undefined spleen. But release is also capacity building. Release creates space, and space is what allows more to arrive cleanly. So when you hear becoming the version of you who can hold this, I want you to hold two truths at once. One, you are widening so that you can hold more. And two, you are learning to put down what was never yours to carry anymore. And both are forms of becoming. Now let's actually go back to talking about emotional range, because this is where I find the lived experience really is. So let's go back to the same examples. More visibility will amplify everything. More success will amplify everything. More money will amplify everything. Not because more of any of those things or other things is the problem, but because amplification reveals what's already there. If you're used to managing your emotions by staying small, then more visibility will stretch you. If you're used to regulating by overworking, then more success will tempt you into old patterns. If you're used to stabilizing by controlling outcomes, then more uncertainty will feel like threat. So the work becomes less about controlling the expansion and more about expanding your range inside of it. And range is built through repetition. It's built through micro moments. And I am such a big believer in this. If you've never had a session with me or heard me say this before, I'm going to repeat it again. It doesn't have to mean going to a retreat or, again, back to the fireworks or the champagne popping moments to some big capacity building experience. It's in the micro moments that you sit with every single day. It's going to pee when you actually need to pee and not just like earning your way to the bathroom, like after I make this call or finish this email or wash these dishes. It is in the littlest moments every day that we build safety in our body, that we build safety between us and us, that we make different choices that then our body learns can be safe, like the world didn't end because we went to pee when we needed to pee. And excuse the crude example, but I find this resonates with so many people, and I'll put my hand up to say this is definitely me. And I'll offer some other examples as well. Micro moments can look like choosing to stay present one breath longer than you used to, or choosing not to over-explain that one time, choosing not to perform in that one moment, or choosing not to collapse into self-doubt or let the spiral continue, choosing to receive a compliment or receive payment, choosing to feel intensity in your body and just not interpret it as danger in that moment, choosing to let the moment be big without needing to shrink it back down. That's capacity, and that is widening. And if you're someone who resonates with human design, maybe, then you can think of it like this. Your body is already communicating with you, not through perfect answers, not through mental clarity, but through sensation, through contraction and expansion, through tightening and softening, through what feels sustainable and what feels like pressure, through pleasure and pressure is one of my favorite questions to ask myself. Am I doing this through pressure or pleasure? And there's a specific kind of maturity I feel that happens when you stop demanding your growth to be dramatic, when you stop needing proof, but when you start trusting that what's real can be quiet. It's where a lot of people get bored and abandon themselves because they think if it's not thrilling, it's not working. But often the most stable expansion is not thrilling. It's steady and integrated and rooted. And the best part is that it therefore lasts. So if something feels delayed right now, instead of asking, why isn't it just here yet? And I get that so much. So let's all try asking, where am I being widened? Where am I being asked to increase my range? Where am I learning to hold slightly more without gripping or feeling fear? Where am I stabilizing? Because the delay might simply be integration. It might be the slow and sacred process of becoming the woman or man who doesn't collapse when it does arrive. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stop treating the edge like a problem and instead meet it with steadiness. Because steadiness is the language of safety that your body speaks, and safety is what allows your capacity to grow. You don't chase the next level, you grow into it. You don't actually manifest bigger things. You stabilize, add a bigger capacity to hold more things. You allow widening. And when you can sit calmly inside what once would have overwhelmed you, that's when you know you have become the version of you that can hold this. And from there, more doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like home. Oof. I really felt that. And I invite you to notice where you're already holding more than you previously could, where neutrality has replaced contraction. What was once activating just now feels normal. That's growth, baby. That's expansion, and that's becoming, and it's happening quietly. Not because you pushed, but because you widened. And the version of you that can hold more of what you desire is not ahead of you. She's forming through you right now. So the next time you feel yourself reaching for the next level, I invite you to pause. And instead of pushing, maybe try asking, can I widen by 1 degree? Can I stay present 1 breath longer? Can I let this moment be a little bigger? Can I let myself hold a little more? That's how it happens. Not all at once, but for real. And if you would like support with this widening, I created a practice for you. It's a space to strengthen your capacity quietly and to practice staying steady inside your expansion. No pushing, no performing. Just widening, because you don't have to leap or retreat. You can widen 1 breath at a time, 1 moment at a time. That's how capacity grows. That's how expansion becomes sustainable. And that's how more just feels like home, like a place you live. It's a short, guided audio, and the link is waiting for you in the show notes. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.